Thanks for watching this video. This is Mr. Bowman, and in this video we're going to solve quadratic equations with the quadratic formula. So before we look at this new idea, let's see if we can use the idea from the previous video to solve this quadratic equation. X squared plus 3x minus 5 equals 0. Let me try it by factoring. Let me set up that box we factor with. And let's see if we can factor that trinomial on the left side. To factor x squared plus 3x minus 5, x squared belongs here. I need negative 5 here. You know, the only way to get things that multiply together to get x squared that I see would be x and x. For numbers that multiply to 5, I only see one option, 1 and 5. And the negative sign there tells me that they're going to have to be different. If I put the 5 here and the 1 here, if this was negative and this was positive, that would get me plus 5x and minus 1x. That's not 3x, is it? And if I changed the signs, and made this one negative, and this one positive, well, that gets me even further away. That gets me to negative 4. I'm not sure this one can factor. And in fact, it can't. Not every quadratic equation can be solved by factoring, simply because not every trinomial that you pick is factorable. So we're going to have to find another method that works for some. And here is that other method. It's called the quadratic formula. For any quadratic equation of that form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are those real numbers that you can identify, if that expression equals 0, then the solutions are these. They're x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of the expression b squared minus 4 times a times c all over whatever 2 times a is. We can use this expression to find both of the solutions, if there are any, the quadratic equation that we're given. What this means is that you can solve a quadratic equation by simply knowing what a, b, and c are. And this will work for any quadratic equation. Even ones that can be factored can still be solved this way. Let's look at an example. Let's use the quadratic equation, the quadratic formula, to solve the quadratic equation 3x squared minus 5x minus 2 equals 0. The first thing I want to do is identify what those numbers a, b, and c that we can recognize are. So remember that a is the coefficient of the x squared term, so a is 3. B is the coefficient of the x term including the sign, so b is negative 5. And c is the term without any x. C is negative 2. All I need to do now is to plug into the quadratic formula those values for a, b, and c. So x equals the opposite of b. The opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. The next symbol is the plus and minus sign put together in 1, and we'll talk more about what that means in a minute. Now I've got the square root of, I've got b squared, so negative 5 squared minus 4 times a times c and I've got all of that over whatever 2 times a is. Especially as you're starting to work on these, it's helpful to go back one more time and make sure that you got everything in the right place. Here is the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All we've got to do to find these solutions now is carefully simplify this. So let's give it a shot. So we've got x is 5 plus or minus the square root of, this is essentially an expression to simplify using order of operations. And I see an exponent first. I need to square my negative 5, and negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. Minus 4 times 3 times negative 2. Might want to go ahead and multiply the numbers in the denominator as well. 2 times 3, that's 6. The only thing left to do, or I shouldn't say the only thing left to do, but the next thing left to do for order of operations under that radical is to multiply these three numbers together. And I found it helpful to almost treat this minus 4 times a times c as negative 4 times a times c. So let's think about what that would be. We've got 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 12 times negative 2 is a positive 24. So that radical is the square root of 25 plus 24. So now the last thing to do to simplify the expression under the radical is to add together those two numbers. 25 plus 24 would give me 49. I've got 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 all over 6. Do we know what the square root of 49 is? What number could you multiply by itself and get 49? Yeah, 7. So the solutions are going to be 5 plus or minus 7 all over 2. Now here's where we need to talk about what this plus or minus sign means. This plus or minus sign understands that there are likely two solutions and wants you to use each of those signs once to create one of the two solutions. So once you get everything else simplified, here's where you need to kind of split this off into two answers. For one of them, you're going to use the plus sign and figure out whatever 5 plus 7 over 2 is. For the other one, you're going to use the minus sign and figure out whatever 5 minus 7 over 2 is. Whatever those two expressions equal, those are our two answers. 5 plus 7 is 12. So 12 divided by 2 is 6. That's 1. 5 minus 7 is negative 2. So negative 2 divided by positive 2 is negative 1. And there are our two answers, our two solutions, 6 and negative 1. Let's see if we can solve this equation. X squared plus 3x minus 5 equals 0, the one that we tried to factor at the beginning of the video and couldn't. Let's use the quadratic formula. There's no number, no coefficient of the x squared term. It's a 1. A is 1. B is 3 in this case. And C is negative 5. So here's the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of B, and the opposite of B is negative 3. Plus or minus the square root of, now I need B squared, 3 squared, minus 4 times A times C all over whatever 2 times A is. To simplify, x is negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, let's see, 3 squared is 9, minus 4 times 1 times negative 5, all over, and the denominator is 2. 2 times 1 is 2. So we've got x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9. We need to multiply these three numbers together. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 5 is positive 20. And I get that all over 2. And to simplify what's under the radical, 9 plus 20, well, that's the square root of 29 now. Now the difference in this example is that the square root of 29 is not a nice number. It's not a perfect integer. It's not a whole number. But when I use my calculator to approximate the square root of 29, It said I could round to the nearest tenth. It's about 5.4. So now I can use the plus sign to get one of my answers, negative 3 plus 5.4 all over 2. And I can use the negative sign, the minus sign, to get my other answer, negative 3 minus 5.4 all over 2. Negative 3 plus 5.4 is 2.4 divided by 2, which is 1.2. Negative 3 minus 5.4 is negative 8.4 divided by 2, which is negative 4.2. My two answers are 1.2 and negative 4.2. Thanks for watching.